The first thing Caleb Morgan noticed was the sound. Not the siren. Not the shouting. The click. Plastic against plastic. When the officer's hand settled on his holster. Caleb stood on the sidewalk across from the precinct, phone held steady at chest height, red recording dot glowing like a warning light. The late afternoon sun bounced off squad cars and badges, turning everything too bright, too exposed. Officers laughed near the steps. Someone shoved a handcuffed man into the back of a cruiser. Routine. Ordinary. Ugly in its calm. "Sir," a voice called. Commanding. "You need to move." Caleb didn't. He adjusted his grip instead, angling the lens. His pulse stayed even. He'd learned how to breathe through moments like this. "I'm on public property," he said. "I'm allowed to film." The laughter behind the officer faded. Boots shifted. Radios crackled. The officer, Daniel Reeves, name stitched in white above his pocket, stepped closer. Too close. Close enough that Caleb could smell coffee and gun oil. "You filming us?" Reeves asked. Caleb nodded. "Yes." Reeves smiled, thin and practiced. "Then you're interfering." Hands grabbed Caleb's arm. The phone tilted. Guy badge concrete. His wrist twisted hard enough to make his teeth clench. Around them people slowed. Some stared. Some looked away. "You people always think the rules are different for you," Reeves muttered, low enough to feel personal. That line cut deeper than the cuffs snapping shut. As Caleb was pushed toward the cruiser, his phone slid from his fingers, still recording, its camera pointed up, catching Reeves's face as the officer leaned down and said, almost kindly, "Let's see who believes you now." The door slammed. Darkness swallowed the frame. Caleb Morgan stood across the street from the precinct with his phone raised, elbows tucked in, shoulders loose. He looked like a man waiting for a bus, not someone documenting the slow churn of authority. The afternoon sun pressed down on the pavement, heat shimmering above the hoods of parked cruisers. Officers moved in and out of the building, relaxed, loud, unhurried. He pressed record. Patrol car rolled up too fast and stopped hard. An officer yanked open the back door. A young man, hands cuffed, jaw tight, was guided inside with more force than necessary. The sound of metal against metal carried. Caleb angled the camera. "Hey," someone called. "What are you doing?" Caleb didn't turn right away. He'd learned that lesson. Sudden movements invited suspicion. He finished framing the shot, then looked up. A white officer stood a few feet away, feet planted wide, hands hovering near his belt. "I'm filming," Caleb said. The officer frowned. "Why?" "Because I can." That answer always changed the air. "I need you to step back," the officer said. His tone was polite, practiced. "You're interfering." Caleb glanced down at the sidewalk, then back up. "I'm on public property. I'm not interfering." The officer's eyes flicked to the phone, then to Caleb's face. He read him quickly, skin color, posture, calm, and made a decision. "What's your name?" he asked. "I don't have to give that." "Was." The officer smiled without warmth. "Sure you do if I ask." Caleb felt it then, the shift. Radios crackled louder. Laughter behind them died out. Another officer drifted closer, pretending not to watch. "My name isn't relevant," Caleb said. "I'm exercising my rights." "Your rights," the officer repeated, like the words tasted strange. He stepped closer. "Too close." "Sir, turn off the camera." "No." That was the moment. Caleb would replay it later, searching for alternatives. There weren't any. The officer reached for his arm. "You're being detained." "For what?" "Interfering with a police investigation." Caleb's wrist was twisted behind his back. Pain shot up his forearm. His phone tilted, catching blue sky, then concrete, then a blur of legs. "Stop resisting," someone said. "I'm not resisting," Caleb replied, teeth clenched. Cold metal closed around his wrists. The cuffs were tight, intentionally so. Around them a few people had stopped. A woman raised her own phone, then lowered it when an officer looked her way. "Why are you arresting him?" she asked. "Ma'am, move along." Caleb was guided toward the cruiser. His phone slipped from his fingers, landing face up on the sidewalk, still recording. He tried to turn his head to see if it was safe. A hand pressed between his shoulders. Inside the car, the door slammed. The sound was final. The glass cut the world in half. Outside, the officer leaned down. Caleb could see his name now, Reeves. "You people love cameras," Reeves said quietly. "But they don't always tell the whole story." Caleb met his eyes through the glass. He said nothing. Silence was a choice. Reeves straightened and walked away. The car pulled off. Siren off. No urgency. Just procedure. Caleb stared at his reflection in the window. His heart pounded, steady and loud. He thought about reports, about language, about how easily words could become weapons. He thought about how many times he'd watched this from the other side. He closed his eyes and counted his breaths. Outside on the sidewalk, his phone kept recording until the battery died. Morning crept into the holding area without warmth. The windows were narrow and set too high to see through, letting in only a dull gray light that flattened everything it touched. Caleb sat on the same metal bench, jacket folded beside him, listening to the rhythm of the room. Coughs, shifting feet, the distant buzz of a door unlocking somewhere deeper in the building. The man across from him cleared his throat. "You here long?" "Overnight," Caleb said. The man nodded like that confirmed something. "They always do that. Keep you just long enough to make a point." Another detainee leaned forward, elbows on knees. "What you in for?" "Filming." That earned a few quiet laughs. Not humor. Recognition. "Yeah," the man said. "That tracks." Caleb studied their faces. Different ages. Same tired wariness. He'd read reports like this. Seen charts and statistics. It was different hearing it in voices that carried resignation instead of outrage. "They say you were interfering?" the older man asked. "Yes. They always do," he replied. "Interfering means you made them uncomfortable." A guard walked past, keys clinking. Conversation stopped instantly. Silence wasn't fear exactly. It was conditioning. When the guard disappeared, the older man leaned closer. "You know why they hate cameras?" Caleb shook his head. "Because cameras don't forget," the man said. "And they don't scare easy." Later that morning, Caleb was escorted to another interview room. A different officer this time. Older. Slower. Desk sergeant stripes on his sleeve. His nameplate read Harris. Harris closed the door and sat across from him. He didn't smile. "Look," Harris said, folding his hands. "I'm gonna be straight with you. I'd appreciate that. You made things harder than they needed to be." Caleb waited. "Reeves says you escalated," Harris continued. "Refused commands. Got aggressive." "I didn't," Caleb said. Harris nodded like he'd expected that answer. "That's what everyone says." "Do you believe him?" Caleb asked. Harris paused, long enough to be honest without saying anything. "Belief isn't my job." "What is?" "Keeping this place running." Caleb leaned back. "At whose expense?" Harris's jaw tightened. "You think this is new?" "No," Caleb said. "I think it's normalized." That landed. Harris exhaled slowly. "You're not wrong. But knowing that doesn't protect you. Neither does pretending it's fine." Another pause. Harris stood. "Just be careful." Outside the room, a TV mounted in the hallway played a local news segment on mute. Caleb caught his own image for half a second. Blurry footage from a distance, him being pushed into the cruiser. The headline crawled beneath. "Man arrested after interfering with police activity." The words were clean, neutral, efficient. By noon, the cell buzzed with new energy. A guard muttered something about protesters. Someone else mentioned social media. "They outside?" one detainee asked. "Across the street," the guard replied. "Like always." Caleb closed his eyes. He pictured handmade signs. Familiar chants. The cycle repeating. In the afternoon, Laura returned. Her pace was quicker now. "That video," she said as soon as they Saturday, "it's spreading." Caleb nodded. "It didn't even finish recording." "Doesn't matter," she said. "People filled in the ending themselves." "What's the department saying?" "That you were non-compliant," she replied. "They're emphasizing officer safety. Using a lot of vague language." "Of course." Laura hesitated. "There's something else." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed complaints. Names redacted. One officer's name appeared again and again. Reeves. Internal Affairs. Caleb asked. "Closed," Laura said. "Every time." "Why show me this?" "Because someone leaked it," she said. "And because patterns matter." Caleb felt the familiar tightening in his chest. This was the part that never made headlines. The accumulation. The quiet burying. "They'll say it's unrelated," he said. "They already are." Side chants grew louder. Even through concrete walls they carried. A rhythm of anger and hope braided together. That evening, Caleb was allowed another call. He dialed the same number. "They're circling the wagons," he said. "Expected," the voice replied. "What about Reeves?" "Complaints. Buried. Low curse. We can open that." "Not yet," Caleb said. "You're letting this get personal." "It already is," Caleb replied. "But it's also bigger than me." Silence followed. Then, "You always say that. And I'm always right." When the call ended, Caleb sat alone for a long time. He thought about training sessions where they talked about systemic failure like it was a theory. He thought about the men in the cell. Harris's half-warning. Laura's careful hope. He thought about the camera. Late that night, a guard approached his cell. "Morgan." Caleb stood. "You're being moved." "Where?" The guard didn't answer. As Caleb was led down the hallway, he passed the bulletin board again. Reeves's photo was gone. In its place was an empty square of lighter paint. Caleb felt no satisfaction. Only confirmation. This wasn't one bad officer. Never was. It was a system that corrected itself only when watched, and punished those who did the watching. As the door ahead opened, Caleb straightened his shoulders. Patterns once seen couldn't be unseen. The report appeared online before Caleb ever saw it in person. Laura brought a printed copy into the interview room, the pages clipped neatly together, edges still warm from the printer. She didn't sit right away. She read the first paragraph again, jaw tight, then slid it across the table. "Officer Daniel Reeves's official account," she said. "Filed 3 hours after your arrest." Caleb didn't touch it at first. He stared at the black text, the clean margins, the authority baked into every sentence. "Read it," Laura said quietly. He did. According to the report, Caleb had been loitering suspiciously near the precinct. He had refused multiple lawful commands to step back. His filming was described as aggressive and provocative. Reeves claimed Caleb moved toward him, raised his voice, caused nearby officers to fear escalation. The phrase officer safety appeared 4 times on the first page alone. Caleb exhaled through his nose. "It's fiction." "Yes," Laura said. "But it's admissible fiction." He turned the page. The most damaging line came halfway down. Subject resisted by tensing arms and pulling away, necessitating restraint. Caleb looked up. "That's the hook." Laura nodded. "Resisting justifies everything that comes after. Even when it's a lie. Especially then." Caleb leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. Fluorescent lights hummed above them, steady and indifferent. "What about body cam?" Laura flipped to her notes. "Reeves's camera activates late. It starts after you're already cuffed. And before that. Technical malfunction," she said. "That's the official explanation." Caleb laughed once, short and humorless. "Of course it is. There's more," Laura added. 2 other officers submitted supplemental statements. He stiffened. Saying what? That they perceived you as non-compliant, she replied. That Reeves acted appropriately. That they feared the situation could escalate. They're backing him. Yes. Caleb picked up the report now, scanning the signatures at the bottom. 3 names, 3 badges. Closed circle. This is how it hardens, he said. The first version becomes the truth. Everything else has to fight uphill. Laura studied him. You've seen this before. Too many times. Outside the room, voices echoed down the hallway. Someone laughed. Someone slammed a drawer. Life continued. The prosecutor will rely heavily on this, Laura said. They always do. It's clean. Procedural. It sounds reasonable to people who weren't there. And people who were. They already chose a side. Caleb folded the report and slid it back. What are our options? We challenge credibility, she said. We request full body cam logs. Dispatch audio. Surveillance from nearby buildings. We push for discovery. And the department. They'll stall, Laura replied. Delay. Claim exemptions. Caleb nodded. They're buying time. Yes. For what? Laura hesitated. For the narrative to settle. That afternoon, the department held a press conference. Caleb watched it on a small TV bolted to the wall outside the interview rooms. No sound, just captions. The police chief stood at a podium, expression grave, hands folded. We take these matters seriously. An internal review is underway. Our officers acted in accordance with policy. Behind him, the department seal gleamed. Reeves didn't appear. That was intentional. Absence signaled protection. The cheeren at the bottom of the screen read, Department defends officer after viral arrest video. Viral. As if outrage were a disease. Later, Laura returned with updates. Internal Affairs confirmed they're reviewing the incident. Caleb raised an eyebrow. And Reeves remains on active duty. Of course he does. They're framing it as a misunderstanding, she continued, emphasizing that filming is allowed, but interference is not. Caleb stood and paced the room. They're narrowing the question. Yes. From was this arrest lawful? To, did he cross an invisible line? Laura watched him move. You're good at this. I'm tired of being good at it. By evening, Caleb was released again, this time with stricter conditions. Outside, the crowd had grown. Signs bobbed above heads. Filming is not a crime. Who watches the watchers? As he walked past, cameras turned toward him. Microphones extended. Someone shouted, How do you respond to the police report? Caleb stopped. He felt Laura tense beside him. He looked at the reporter. I respond by telling the truth, he said. And by waiting for evidence to speak louder than paperwork. That quote ran everywhere. By nightfall, pundits weighed in. Some questioned Reeves's account. Others warned against vilifying law enforcement. Comment sections filled with familiar lines. About respect, about compliance, about why filming made people nervous. Caleb read none of it. Instead, he sat alone in his apartment, lights off, phone face down on the table. He replayed the arrest in his mind, frame by frame, comparing it to the report. The distance between reality and record felt obscene. At midnight, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. They're scrambling. Caleb typed back, good. Another message followed. But they're also digging. Be ready. He set the phone down and stared out the window at the city lights. Somewhere, Reeves was probably doing the same thing. Confident, insulated by ink and signatures. The report had done its job. It had stabilized the system. Now it would take something heavier to crack it. The report appeared online before Caleb ever saw it in person. Laura brought a printed copy into the interview room, the pages clipped neatly together, edges still warm from the printer. She didn't sit right away. She read the first paragraph again, jaw tight, then slid it across the table. Officer Daniel Reeves's official account, she said. Filed 3 hours after your arrest. Caleb didn't touch it at first. He stared at the black text, the clean margins, the authority baked into every sentence. Read it, Laura said quietly. He did. According to the report, Caleb had been loitering suspiciously near the precinct. He had refused multiple lawful commands to step back. His filming was described as aggressive and provocative. Reeves claimed Caleb moved toward him, raised his voice, caused nearby officers to fear escalation. The phrase officer safety appeared 4 times on the first page alone. Caleb exhaled through his nose. It's fiction. Yes, Laura said. But it's admissible fiction. He turned the page. The most damaging line came halfway down. Subject resisted by tensing arms and pulling away, necessitating restraint. Caleb looked up. That's the hook. Laura nodded. Resisting justifies everything that comes after. Even when it's a lie. Especially then. Caleb leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. Fluorescent lights hummed above them, steady and indifferent. What about body cam? Laura flipped to her notes. Reeves's camera activates late. It starts after you're already cuffed. And before that. Technical malfunction, she said. That's the official explanation. Caleb laughed once, short and humorless. Of course it is. There's more, Laura added. 2 other officers submitted supplemental statements. He stiffened. Saying what? That they perceived you as non-compliant, she replied. That Reeves acted appropriately. That they feared the situation could escalate. They're backing him. Yes. Caleb picked up the report now, scanning the signatures at the bottom. 3 names, 3 badges. Closed circle. This is how it hardens, he said. The first version becomes the truth. Everything else has to fight uphill. Laura studied him. You've seen this before. Too many times. Outside the room, voices echoed down the hallway. Someone laughed. Someone slammed a drawer. Life continued. The prosecutor will rely heavily on this, Laura said. They always do. It's clean. Procedural. It sounds reasonable to people who weren't there. And people who were. They already chose a side. Caleb folded the report and slid it back. What are our options? We challenge credibility, she said. We request full body cam logs. Dispatch audio. Surveillance from nearby buildings. We push for discovery. And the department. They'll stall, Laura replied. Delay. Claim exemptions. Caleb nodded. They're buying time. Yes. For what? Laura hesitated. For the narrative to settle. That afternoon, the department held a press conference. Caleb watched it on a small TV bolted to the wall outside the interview rooms. No sound, just captions. The police chief stood at a podium, expression grave, hands folded. We take these matters seriously. An internal review is underway. Our officers acted in accordance with policy. Behind him, the department seal gleamed. Reeves didn't appear. That was intentional. Absence signaled protection. The chiron at the bottom of the screen read, Department defends officer after viral arrest video. Viral. As if outrage were a disease. Later, Laura returned with updates. Internal Affairs confirmed they're reviewing the incident. Caleb raised an eyebrow. And Reeves remains on active duty. Of course he does. They're framing it as a misunderstanding, she continued. Emphasizing that filming is allowed, but interference is not. Caleb stood and paced the room. They're narrowing the question. Yes. From was this arrest lawful? To, did he cross an invisible line? Laura watched him move. You're good at this. I'm tired of being good at it. By evening, Caleb was released again, this time with stricter conditions. Outside, the crowd had grown. Signs bobbed above heads. Filming is not a crime. Who watches the watchers? As he walked past, cameras turned toward him. Microphones extended. someone shouted. How do you respond to the police report? Caleb stopped. He felt Laura tense beside him. He looked at the reporter. I respond by telling the truth, he said. And by waiting for evidence to speak louder than paperwork. That quote ran everywhere. By nightfall, pundits weighed in. Some questioned Reeves's account. Others warned against vilifying law enforcement. Comment sections filled with familiar lines. About respect, about compliance, about why filming made people nervous. Caleb read none of it. Instead, he sat alone in his apartment, lights off, phone face down on the table. He replayed the arrest in his mind, frame by frame, comparing it to the report. The distance between reality and record felt obscene. At midnight, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. They're scrambling. Caleb typed back, good. Another message followed. But they're also digging. Be ready. He set the phone down and stared out the window at the city lights. Somewhere, Reeves was probably doing the same thing. Confident, insulated by ink and signatures. The report had done its job. It had stabilized the system. Now it would take something heavier to crack it. The leak didn't arrive like an explosion. See. Caleb noticed it first in the quiet way Laura spoke when she called that morning. Less caution. More urgency. It's not just your video anymore, she said. Someone pushed. From where? Caleb asked. Inside, Laura replied. Not the department officially. Someone adjacent. Old complaints. Training memos. A pattern. Caleb closed his eyes. He pictured filing cabinets, forgotten folders, decisions made easier by time. What kind of pattern? The kind that's hard to explain away, she said. Stops without cause. Escalations tied to cameras. Language that repeats. Reeves's language. By noon, screenshots flooded timelines. Redacted reports stacked like dominoes. Dates circled in red. Phrases highlighted. Perceived threat. Non-compliant posture. Officer safety. The same words. Over and over. Caleb sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, coffee untouched. He read slowly, deliberately, separating heat from substance. This was the work. Not the anger. The proof. A knock came at the door. Laura stepped in, rain speckling her coat. They're calling it selective release. They would, Caleb said. She sat across from him. Internal Affairs issued a statement. He raised an eyebrow. They say prior complaints were investigated and resolved, she said. They emphasize due process for officers. Due process, Caleb repeated. Not civilians. Laura didn't argue. Outside, rain streaked the windows, blurring the city into lines and smudges. Sirens wailed somewhere far off. The world kept happening. By afternoon, a new video surfaced. Not clearer, not complete, but different. Security footage from a business across the street. Grainy, distant. It showed Caleb standing still. Reeves stepping forward. The moment before hands grabbed. No audio. No context. Just space. It doesn't show resistance, Laura said, watching it loop. No, Caleb replied. It shows patience. That clip ran everywhere. Cable news booked experts. Some praised transparency. Others warned against mob judgment. A former chief insisted context was missing. A civil rights attorney pointed to the complaints. Caleb turned it off. He felt the pressure building behind his eyes, the familiar ache of vigilance. Exposure came with a cost. It always did. That night he couldn't sleep. Every sound sharpened. Every shadow lingered. He replayed the arrest again, but now it tangled with memories he'd filed away. Other cases, other faces, other nights where truth had arrived late and bruised. 3 a.m. he got a message. They're offering a deal. He typed back, from who? City attorney. Caleb sat up. What kind of deal? Drop charges quietly. Mutual non-disparagement. He laughed, a short bark that startled him in the dark. No accountability. Exactly, the reply came. They want it to end. Caleb stared at the ceiling. Ending was tempting. Ending meant rest. Ending meant no more weight pressing on his chest. He typed, "Tell them no." Morning broke gray and low. Protesters gathered again. Fewer signs. More resolve. Caleb walked past them, hood up, head down. Someone recognized him and nodded. No cheers. No chants. Just acknowledgement. At the courthouse, Laura met him with new documents. "Reeves has been reassigned." "Temporarily," Caleb said. "Yes," she agreed. "But it's movement." Inside, the prosecutor avoided eye contact. Proceedings dragged. Motions filed. Dates set and reset. Outside, the leak grew legs. A former officer spoke anonymously. Described pressure to conform. To back reports. To stay silent. A training memo surfaced advising officers to control narratives during citizen recordings. The department denied its intent. Caleb read everything. He catalogued. He waited. Late afternoon, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "You don't know me," the message read. "But I was there." Caleb typed carefully. "Where?" "A day. The sidewalk." "Why reach out now?" Then, "Because I'm tired of pretending I didn't see it." They met at a diner near the courthouse. Booth by the window. Coffee refills too fast. The man was middle-aged, neatly dressed, hands shaking slightly. "I work in records," he said. "Not sworn. I see reports after." "What did you see?" Caleb asked. "Edits," the man replied. Language cleaned up. Time stamps adjusted. Caleb felt the room tilt. "Do you have proof?" The man slid a flash drive across the table. "Not copies. Originals." Caleb didn't touch it yet. "Why me?" "Because you didn't flinch," the man said. "And because cameras scare them." Caleb nodded once. "They should." That evening, Laura watched the files load, her face pale. "This changes things." "It confirms them," Caleb said. The department responded within hours. An emergency statement. Claims of misinformation. An internal audit announced. Reeves's name vanished from rosters. Caleb sat alone as night fell, exhaustion settling into his bones. Justice felt closer now, but heavier. Exposure didn't heal. Stripped. He thought about the men in the holding cell. The sergeant's warning. The empty square on the bulletin board. Exposure cracked the surface. It didn't fix what lay beneath, but cracks let light in. And for the first time since the cuffs closed, Caleb allowed himself to believe the system might finally be forced to look at itself. The hearing room was smaller than Caleb expected. No grand courtroom. No spectators' gallery. Just a long table, neutral walls, and the quiet hum of an overworked air conditioner. Fluorescent lights washed everything in a pale, colorless glow that made faces look tired before anyone spoke. Caleb sat beside Laura, hands folded, posture calm. Across from them, the city attorney shuffled papers too loudly. A representative from Internal Affairs sat rigidly, eyes forward. Two supervisors from the department filled the remaining seats. Reeves was not there. That absence mattered. "Let's begin," the city attorney said, clearing his throat. "This is an administrative hearing to assess." Laura interrupted gently. "Before we proceed, we're entering additional material into the record." She slid a folder across the table. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Pages flipped. The Internal Affairs representative frowned. "This wasn't disclosed." "It's newly relevant," Laura replied. "And lawfully obtained." Caleb watched their faces change as they read. Confusion first. Then tension. Then something closer to alarm. "What is this?" one of the supervisors asked. Laura didn't answer. She looked at Caleb instead. This was the moment. Caleb stood. The room went still. He felt his pulse in his ears, steady but insistent. Not fear. Resolve. "My name is Caleb Morgan," he said. "You know me as a defendant, as a civilian, as someone who filmed an arrest." He paused, letting the silence stretch. I'm also a federal investigator assigned to a civil rights task force, he continued. My work involves documenting patterns of misconduct, particularly when they intersect with retaliation against lawful observation. The city attorney blinked. You're saying? I'm saying, Caleb said evenly, that I was never just a bystander. The internal affairs representative straightened. Why wasn't this disclosed earlier? Because, Caleb replied, I wanted to see how your system behaved when it thought no one important was watching. That landed hard. One supervisor pushed his chair back slightly. This is highly irregular. So was my arrest, Caleb said. Laura slid another document forward. Here's his federal identification. Credentials. Assignment letter. Verified. No one spoke. The air conditioner rattled. Officer Reeves, Laura continued, has now triggered federal oversight. Not because of who he arrested, but because of why. The city attorney's face drained of color. You set this up. Caleb shook his head. I documented what happened. The system did the rest. The internal affairs representative closed the folder slowly. This changes jurisdiction. Yes, Laura said. It does. A knock sounded at the door. A uniformed officer stepped in, leaned down, whispered something to one of the supervisors. The supervisor's eyes flicked to Caleb, then away. Reeves had been notified. Caleb sat back down, hands steady. Inside something loosened. Not triumph. Relief. The weight of withholding lifted. Minutes later, Reeves entered. His confidence was gone. He looked smaller somehow. His posture stiff. His eyes scanned the room, landed on Caleb, then darted away. He took a seat without speaking. Officer Reeves, the internal affairs representative said carefully, do you understand why this hearing has escalated? Reeves swallowed. I was informed there were new developments. Caleb watched his jaw tighten. You arrested Mr. Morgan, the representative continued, under the assertion that he interfered with police activity. Yes, Reeves said. He was aggressive. Non-compliant. Caleb leaned forward slightly. Define aggressive. Reeves looked at him now, irritation flashing. You were filming. Refusing commands. From public property, Caleb said. You moved toward me. I adjusted my stance. That's resistance. Laura interjected. Officer Reeves, are you aware that Mr. Morgan is a federal investigator? Reeves hesitated. Too long. I am now, he said. And does that affect your testimony? Laura asked. No, Reeves replied quickly. The law applies equally. Caleb nodded. That's the first true thing you've said. Reeves flushed. You baited us. I exercised my rights, Caleb said. You punished me for it. The internal affairs representative raised a hand. Officer Reeves, did you deactivate your body camera prior to this encounter? Reeves stiffened. No. There was a malfunction. Records show manual deactivation 3 minutes earlier. Silence. Reeves's mouth opened. Closed. Caleb spoke softly. This is the part where the story changes. Reeves slammed a hand on the table. You think flashing a badge makes you untouchable? No, Caleb said. I think it makes the truth unavoidable. The supervisors exchanged looks. One of them stood. We're suspending this hearing. Laura shook her head. You can't. Federal oversight has been triggered. The city attorney rubbed his temples. This is going to blow back on everyone. That depends, Caleb said, on what you do next. The room emptied slowly after that. Papers gathered. Phones checked. Urgent whispers exchanged in corners. Reeves lingered. As Caleb stood to leave, Reeves spoke. You ruined my career. Caleb stopped. Turned. No, he said quietly. You documented it yourself. Reeves stared at him, something like fear breaking through the anger. You could have said who you were. Yes, Caleb replied. And then this would have ended quietly. For me. He met Reeves's eyes. How many others would still be invisible? Reeves had no answer. Outside, the hallway buzzed with motion. Agents he recognized nodded once, professionally. Phones rang. Doors opened and closed. Laura walked beside him. "You okay?" Caleb exhaled. "Ask me tomorrow." As they stepped into the daylight, cameras surged forward. Microphones thrust out. Someone shouted, "Is it true you're federal?" Caleb stopped. He didn't smile. "Yes," he said. "And this isn't over." Behind him, inside the building, the system recalibrated. Not out of conscience but necessity. The reveal had shifted the balance. Now came the fallout. The fallout didn't wait for permission. By morning, the department's internal comm had shattered into 1,000 controlled leaks. Caleb woke to a phone vibrating non-stop on his nightstand. Missed calls, messages, alerts stacked like falling dominoes. He let it buzz until it stopped on its own. When he finally checked, the headlines had sharpened. Federal oversight triggered after controversial arrest. Officer suspended amid expanding investigation. Internal reports under review. Suspended, not fired. Language mattered. Laura called an hour later. They put Reeves on administrative leave. "Paid," Caleb said. "Yes," she admitted. "For now." Outside, rain returned steady and cold. Caleb stood at the window, watching people hurry past, collars turned up, eyes down. The city absorbed scandal the way it absorbed weather, brief disruption, then movement. At the courthouse, security had doubled. Federal badges mingled with local ones. The atmosphere stiff with forced cooperation. Caleb moved through it all quietly, a neutral expression masking the constant thrum beneath his ribs. He testified that afternoon. Not in a courtroom, but in a recorded session. 2 federal attorneys. 1 stenographer. Laura beside him, silent but present. "Walk us through the encounter," one attorney said. Caleb did. Slowly. Precisely. No embellishment. No emotion beyond what was unavoidable. When Officer Reeves approached, he said. His posture shifted. He closed distance without cause. That's a tactic. It invites reaction. Did you react? No. Did you resist? No. What did you feel? Caleb paused. The question caught him off guard. "I felt evaluated," he said finally. "Not as a citizen. As a problem." The stenographer's keys clicked. They played footage, froze frames, compared reports. Timestamps didn't line up. Language repeated across statements like copied homework. One attorney leaned back. "This isn't isolated." "No," Caleb said. "It never is." By evening, word spread that supervisors were being interviewed, then reassigned, then placed on leave. The circle widened. Reeves's name appeared again, this time alongside the word charged. Officially. Falsifying reports, violating civil rights, retaliatory arrest. Unofficially. A scapegoat many hoped would be enough. Caleb didn't celebrate. He sat in Laura's office as the news broke, the TV muted. Reeves's booking photo filled the screen. The confident smile was gone. In its place, tight lips and wide eyes. "You okay?" Laura asked. Caleb studied the image. "I'm thinking about what happens next. For him. For everyone else," he replied. Outside, protest shifted tone. Less pleading. More demand. Community leaders spoke. Lists of names circulated. Other cases, other videos, other quiet endings. The department announced reforms. Body cam audits. Dated training. Community advisory boards. Caleb read the press release twice. It was thorough, vague, familiar. That night he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the moment the cuffs closed, heard Reeves's voice, felt the pressure between his shoulders. Justice, it turned out, didn't erase memory, sharpened it. Days later, Caleb was called to testify again, this time publicly. The hearing room was packed. Cameras lined the walls. Reporters filled the back rows. Reeves sat at the defense table, flanked by lawyers. His uniform replaced with a plain suit. Caleb took the stand. "State your name," the clerk said. "Caleb Morgan. Occupation. Federal investigator." A murmur rippled through the room. The prosecutor began. Methodical. "Mr. Morgan, why were you filming outside the precinct?" "Because observation is a safeguard," Caleb replied. "Especially where power is concentrated." "And what happened when you exercised that right?" "I was arrested." "Why?" Caleb met the jury's eyes. "Because my presence challenged control." The defense objected. The judge allowed it. Reeves watched him now, unblinking. When cross-examination came, the defense attorney tried to frame intent. Provocation. Entrapment. "You didn't identify yourself as law enforcement," the attorney said. "I'm not law enforcement," Caleb replied. "I'm oversight. And you concealed that." "I didn't announce it," Caleb corrected. "There's a difference." The attorney leaned closer. "You wanted him to fail." Caleb shook his head. "I wanted him to behave." Silence followed. Outside the courthouse, opinions clashed. Some called Caleb a hero. Others called him deceptive. The same old lines resurfaced, about trust, about respect, about how things should work. Caleb ignored them all. The verdict came weeks later. Guilty. On all counts. Reeves was sentenced to prison time. Less than Caleb thought, just more than the department expected. Supervisors resigned quietly. Settlements were announced without apology. The chief held another press conference. Spoke of accountability. Promised change. Caleb watched from his couch, arms folded. He'd heard those words before. Afterward, Laura called. "It's over." Caleb stared at the darkened TV. "No," he said. "It's paused." She didn't argue. That night, he returned to the sidewalk outside the precinct. No cameras. No crowd. Just him and the building, quiet now. He stood where he'd stood before. Closed his eyes. Breathed. The system had collapsed in on one of its own. Not from conscience, but from exposure. Caleb opened his eyes. Collapse was necessary. But it wasn't enough. Because systems didn't fear justice. They feared being watched. And Caleb wasn't done watching. The silence after the verdict felt heavier than the noise that came before it. For weeks, Caleb had lived inside motion. Hearings, interviews, calls that never seemed to end. Then, suddenly, there was nothing demanding his attention. No schedule pinned to urgency. No phone vibrating with another development. Just mornings that arrived without instructions. He discovered that justice didn't bring relief the way people imagined. Brought space. And space made room for everything he'd been holding back. Caleb woke before dawn most days, heart racing, breath shallow. In his dreams, the cuffs never opened. The cruiser door never unlocked. He'd wake staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that weren't there. Outside, the city adjusted. The department implemented its reforms with press-friendly efficiency. New policies were announced. Training sessions scheduled. A civilian oversight board was formed, its members carefully selected. The police chief stepped down to spend more time with family. His replacement spoke eloquently about trust. Caleb read the headlines with a detached eye. Change written on paper always looked clean. One afternoon, Laura stopped by his apartment. She brought coffee and a stack of documents. "Settlements," she said, setting them on the table. "Several families. Quiet payouts. Without admissions," Caleb replied. "Of course." They sat in silence for a moment. Sunlight slanted through the window, catching dust in the air. "You did something real," Laura said finally. Caleb nodded. "So did a lot of people." She smiled faintly. "You're allowed to take some credit." "I'm not sure I want it." Laura studied him. "What are you going to do now?" He didn't answer right away. That question had been circling him for days. "I'm going back to work," he said eventually. After some time. She raised an eyebrow. "Same kind." "Yes." Laura hesitated. "You sure?" Caleb met her eyes. If I stop now, this becomes a story about one bad moment. I don't want that. She nodded, accepting it. After she left, Caleb opened one of the settlement documents. Names blurred together. Dates repeated. Familiar language softened hard truths. He closed the folder. That evening, he walked through his neighborhood without purpose. People recognized him sometimes. Some nodded. Few thanked him. Others looked away, uncomfortable. At a corner store, a teenager approached him hesitantly. "You're that guy, right?" Caleb smiled gently. "I'm just a guy." The teen nodded. "My mom said what you did mattered." Caleb swallowed. "I hope so." At home he turned on the TV, then turned it off again. News anchors debated reform fatigue. Opinion panels argued about balance. None of it addressed the quiet damage, the way trust fractured invisibly, the way vigilance became instinct. Late one night, Caleb sat at his desk and opened a new file. Not a case. A record. He began writing, not for court, not for press. For himself. He wrote about the holding cell. The bulletin board. The way Reeves's report had read like a mirror version of reality. He wrote about the men he'd shared a bench with, their voices fading into the system. He wrote until his hands cramped. The next morning he met with his supervisor. Small office. Frosted glass. Familiar smell of old carpet and burnt coffee. "You're cleared to return," his supervisor said. "When you're ready." "And the task force?" Caleb asked. "Expanded," the supervisor replied. "More resources. More eyes." Caleb nodded. "Good." The supervisor leaned back. "You could transfer. Policy. Training. Less field work." Caleb considered it. Safety. Distance. "No," he said. "I need to stay close." The supervisor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I figured you'd say that." As weeks passed, the city's attention moved on. Another scandal. Another cycle. Protest signs were packed away. News vans left. But for Caleb, the work sharpened. He reviewed new complaints. Attended meetings with community leaders who no longer trusted polite language. Sat across from officers who spoke carefully now, aware of cameras even when none were visible. Some resented him. Some respected him. Most watched him closely. That was enough. One evening, Caleb received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. "I was in that cell with you," it read. "I didn't think anything would change. I was wrong. Thank you." Caleb folded the letter and placed it in his desk drawer. He didn't feel victorious. He felt anchored. The trauma didn't vanish. Some days he flinched at sudden sounds. Some nights sleep stayed out of reach. He started seeing a therapist, reluctantly at first, then with honesty. "I don't regret what I did," he said during one session. "I just hate that it had to cost this much." The therapist nodded. "That's not a contradiction." On the anniversary of the arrest, Caleb returned to the sidewalk outside the precinct. The building looked the same. Fresh paint on the steps. New signage about community engagement. He stood where he'd stood before, hands empty. Patrol car rolled by slowly. The officer inside glanced at him, then looked away. Caleb felt no fear. No triumph. Just clarity. Justice had come, imperfect and incomplete. It had exposed rot and forced consequence. But it hadn't healed everything. It hadn't restored what had been taken from those before him. Still it mattered. Caleb turned and walked away, carrying both the weight and the resolve with him. The aftermath wasn't an ending. It was the cost of seeing clearly, and choosing not to look away again. The camera felt lighter in Caleb's hand than he remembered. He stood on the same sidewalk, a year to the day since the arrest, phone held steady at chest level. Morning traffic flowed past the precinct in a familiar rhythm. Engines idling, brakes sighing, a bus wheezing as it pulled to the curb. The building looked cleaner now. Fresh paint. New signage. A banner stretched across the front read Community First. Caleb pressed record. Not out of defiance. Out of habit. Out of principle. Across the street, two officers spoke quietly beside a cruiser. Their posture was different, more measured. They glanced his way, then back to their conversation. No one approached him. No one told him to move. That, more than any headline, marked change. A woman stopped near him, curious. "Are you with the news?" she asked. "No," Caleb said. "Just observing." She nodded, as if that made sense now. "Good." The moment passed. Life continued. Caleb adjusted his stance slightly, careful not to step off the curb. He remembered how that small movement had been rewritten once as aggression. The memory still pricked, but it no longer owned him. Patrol car pulled up. The officers inside exited calmly, voices low. A young man stood nearby, hands visible, phone in his pocket. The interaction remained uneventful. Procedural. Brief. Caleb kept filming. His phone buzzed Laura. He ignored it for now. The camera captured ordinary things. A nod, a question, a response. Nothing dramatic. That was the point. After 10 minutes, Caleb lowered the phone. He hadn't needed to film longer. The act itself mattered more than the footage. As he turned to leave, someone called his name. It was Harris, the desk sergeant from before. Older now. Lines deeper around his eyes. "You back at it?" Harris asked. Caleb met his gaze. "Never stopped." Harris shifted his weight. "Things are different." "Some things," Caleb said. Harris nodded. "You made it uncomfortable for a lot of people. That's usually how change starts." Then Harris said quietly, "Not everyone hates you for it." Caleb believed him. He walked away as the sun climbed higher, warmth settling into the pavement. His phone buzzed again. He answered this time. "You done?" Laura asked. "For today," Caleb replied. "Good. I've got coffee." They met at a cafe down the block. Ordinary place. No cameras. No urgency. "You realize," Laura said, stirring her cup, "you've become a symbol." Caleb winced. "I was hoping to avoid that." "You can't," she said gently. "But you can decide what kind." He thought about that as people came and went around them, laughing, arguing, living. "Then I choose consistency," he said. "Showing up. Watching. Documenting." Laura smiled. "That tracks." Later, Caleb returned home and uploaded the morning's footage to a secure archive. Labeled it simply, "Routine Observation." No press release. No commentary. He sat back and looked at the wall where a small calendar hung. New cases marked in neat ink. New cities. New departments. The work continued. That night he dreamed differently. No cuffs. No slam doors. Just movement. Walking. Standing. Seeing. When he woke, he felt rested for the first time in a long while. Weeks later, Caleb received an email from a young investigator joining the task force. "How do you know when to step in?" asked. Caleb typed back. "When silence feels safer than truth, that's your cue." He didn't add anything else. On another morning, in another city, Caleb stood on another sidewalk. Different precinct. Same banner. Same promise. He raised his phone. An officer glanced over, then nodded once, acknowledging his presence. Not with fear. Not with anger. With awareness. Caleb pressed record. Because systems didn't reform themselves out of goodness. They reformed when observation became unavoidable. When accountability stopped being abstract. Because justice wasn't a single verdict or a ruined career. It was a posture. It was the quiet insistence that power be witnessed. Caleb lowered the camera and breathed in the morning air. The city moved around him, unaware of how close it always was to repeating itself. He would be there when it tried. Still watching. Still documenting. Still refusing to disappear. And that, he knew now, was enough to keep the light on. Time did what it always did. It softened the edges without erasing the shape. 2 years passed. Caleb no longer flinched at sirens. Not always. Not like before. The sound still caught his attention, still triggered a quiet inventory. Where am I? Who's nearby? What's visible? But it no longer hijacked his breath. Healing, he learned, wasn't the absence of memory. It was the ability to move forward while carrying it. The case became a reference point. Academies cited it in training modules. Law schools debated it in ethics classes. Departments mentioned it in hushed tones, usually followed by a reminder about optics. Reeves's name faded into footnotes, stripped of the authority it once carried. Caleb never searched for him. Whatever reckoning Reeves lived with was his alone. Caleb's work expanded. New cities, new patterns, different uniforms, same language. He learned to recognize escalation before it happened. The tightening of shoulders, the subtle crowding of space, the words chosen carefully enough to sound lawful while feeling personal. He documented everything. Sometimes intervention came quickly. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the system resisted just long enough to remind him that exposure was a pressure, not a cure. On a cold morning in another state, Caleb stood outside a small-town precinct where snow clung to the edges of the steps. He filmed quietly as officers questioned a man whose hands shook visibly in the cold. The exchange ended without incident. One of the officers glanced over and nodded, just once. Caleb lowered the phone. Later that day, a junior investigator rode with him to the next site. Fresh out of training. Nervous. Idealistic. "Does it ever stop feeling heavy?" she asked. Caleb considered the question as miles passed beneath them. "No," he said. "But it stops feeling lonely." She smiled at that. In quieter moments, Caleb returned to writing. Not reports, not testimony, reflection. He wrote about the holding cell again, but now the memory felt distant, like a scar he could trace without pain. He wrote about Harris, about Laura, about the unnamed records clerk who had slid the flash drive across the diner table with shaking hands. He wrote about the bystanders who looked away, and the few who didn't. One night, while organizing old files, Caleb found the original arrest report again. Reeves's words stared back at him, frozen in time. He didn't feel anger. He felt clarity. That document had been meant to define him, to shrink him into a problem that could be processed and dismissed. Instead, it had revealed more about the system that produced it than the man it targeted. Caleb closed the file and archived it permanently. Some evenings he spoke at community centers. Not as a hero. Not as a cautionary tale. Just as someone who had learned where the cracks formed. "Film calmly," he told people. "Stand where you're allowed. Know the law. And understand that courage doesn't always feel brave when you're inside it." A woman once asked him, "What if they still arrest you?" Caleb answered honestly, "Then the record matters even more." The room went quiet after that. On another anniversary, the 3rd, Caleb returned to the original sidewalk. No cameras this time. No phone in his hand. Just him and the space where it had started. The precinct looked different again. New leadership. New slogans. The banner read "Accountability builds trust." Caleb stood there, hands in his pockets, and watched officers come and go. Nothing remarkable happened. That was the point. As he turned to leave, a young officer approached him cautiously. "Excuse me," the officer said. "Are you?" Caleb waited. "You're Caleb Morgan, right?" "Yes." The officer nodded. "They told us about your case in training." Caleb studied his face. Young, serious, uncertain. "What did they tell you?" "That observation isn't a threat," the officer said. "That authority without accountability doesn't last." Caleb felt something settle in his chest. "That's a good lesson." The officer hesitated. "I just wanted to say, I'm glad you were watching." Caleb nodded once. "So am I." He walked away without looking back. That night, Caleb stood on his balcony, city lights stretching out before him. Somewhere below, laughter drifted up. Somewhere else, a siren cut briefly through the air, then faded. He thought about the idea of endings, how stories like to pretend they existed. This one didn't. Racism didn't end with a conviction. Power didn't dissolve when exposed. Systems adapted. Sometimes they improved. Sometimes they learned to hide better. What remained constant was the need for witnesses. Caleb wasn't naive enough to believe one man with a camera could fix everything. But he knew something else now. Something quieter, sturdier. Watching changed behavior. Documentation changed outcomes. Presence changed dynamics. And those changes accumulated. He took a slow breath and let the city fill his lungs. Tomorrow he'd be in another place, standing on another sidewalk, phone in hand or not, ready to observe. Not because he expected wrongdoing, but because accountability worked best when it was ordinary. Because justice didn't need spectacle to exist. It needed consistency. Caleb turned back inside, closing the door softly behind him. The work went on. So did he. And somewhere, in the space between power and the people it governed, a quiet understanding remained. Someone might be watching,